Welcome back to your channel LeOo Story Land. Here we uncover a real Reddit story. If you liked my video, please like, share, subscribe. My name is Roz and I'm 29 years old. The morning of my son's christening, I stood in front of the mirror in the small room behind the sanctuary, smoothing down the lace collar on his little white gown, and for one quiet moment, I let myself believe that today would be simple. Just family, faith, and a name we had chosen with so much care. My husband Weston stood behind me, adjusting his tie, and he caught my eyes in the reflection and smiled the way he always did when he could tell I was nervous. He didn't know yet what was about to happen. Neither did I. We had named our son Theodore, after Weston's grandfather, a man who had raised him when no one else would. It felt right. It felt like ours. My mother, Ingrid, had other plans, though she hadn't said a word about it to my face. She had mentioned once, in passing, that she preferred the name Julian, that it sounded more distinguished, more fitting for a boy who would carry the family forward. I had smiled politely and told her the decision was already made. I thought that was the end of it. The church was full by the time we walked in, rows of relatives and friends dressed in soft colors, the baptismal font gleaming under the stained glass light. Father Dominic stood ready at the altar, his hands folded, waiting for us to bring Theodore forward. I remember the hum of quiet conversation, the smell of candle wax, the way sunlight fell in colored patches across the stone floor. It should have been perfect. Then my mother stood up. She didn't wait for an invitation. She walked to the small podium near the pews where guests sometimes read a blessing, and she took the microphone meant for the deacon's announcements before the service began. I remember my stomach dropping the second she opened her mouth, because I knew that look on her face. It was the look she wore when she had already decided something and intended to make sure everyone else agreed, whether they wanted to or not. "We're using the name we picked. Yours is ridiculous," she announced loud enough that the whole church turned to look. My mother announced at my son's baptism, in front of the priest, in front of Weston's family, in front of people I had known my entire life, that Theodore would be called Julian instead. She said it like it was already settled, like my husband and I were merely guests at an event she had planned. I felt my face go hot. Weston's hand tightened around mine. But she wasn't finished. Before I could even step forward to speak, she gestured to my aunt, who was holding a wicker basket lined with soft blue cloth, and began handing out small wrapped gifts to the people nearest the front pews. Handing out gifts monogrammed with her choice, each one stitched with the initial J, as if the matter had never been up for discussion at all. I watched people's faces shift from confusion to that uncomfortable, polite smile people give when they don't know what else to do. She'd already told the whole church, she said proudly, that the baby would be Julian from that day forward, and several relatives nodded along, because they had already heard the name from her days earlier, before Weston and I had even walked through the doors. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something sharper. This wasn't just about a name. It was about my mother deciding once again that my life belonged to her to arrange. I looked at Weston. He looked at me, and in that single glance, I felt something settle in my chest, steady and sure. I stepped to the front of the church, past the startled faces, past my mother still holding the microphone with a satisfied little smile, and I asked Father Dominic to stop the ceremony. The church went silent. Even the organist's fingers froze above the keys. My mother turned to me, her expression flickering from confidence to disbelief, as if it had never once occurred to her that I would refuse to simply go along with what she'd already decided for me. Father Dominic looked between us, unsure whether to proceed, his hands still resting near the holy water. I took a breath, feeling every eye in that church settle on me, feeling my son's small weight against my chest, his tiny fingers curled around the edge of my sleeve. I hadn't planned to make a scene. I had only wanted a quiet, meaningful morning for my child. But some moments choose you instead of the other way around, and this was one of them. This baptism, I said, my voice steadier than I expected, is going to happen exactly the way my husband and I intended. My mother opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't finished, and what I said next would change everything between us. My mother opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't finished. "You don't get to rename my son in front of everyone and call it a gift," I said, loud enough for the whole church to hear. "His name is Theodore. It was Theodore before you walked in today, and it will be Theodore when we walk out." A ripple went through the pews, hushed whispers passing from row to row, and I saw my aunt quietly set the basket of monogrammed gifts down on the nearest pew, as if she suddenly didn't want to be holding them anymore. My mother's face went through several expressions in the span of a few seconds: disbelief, embarrassment, and finally something colder, more defensive. "I only wanted to help," she said, her voice tight, trying to soften the moment now that dozens of eyes were on her instead of me. "Julian is a beautiful name. I thought you'd come around once you heard it out loud in front of everyone." That was the part that struck me hardest, the admission, right there in front of the entire congregation, that she had planned this, that she had ordered gifts and told relatives and orchestrated an announcement specifically because she believed public pressure would make me give in. I looked down at Theodore, who had begun to fuss softly against my shoulder, unaware that his own name was being debated over his head. Weston stepped up beside me, placing a steady hand on my back, and spoke calmly but firmly. "Ingrid, we love you, but this isn't your decision to make. It never was." His voice carried none of the anger simmering under my own words, just quiet, immovable certainty, and somehow that landed harder than if he had shouted. Father Dominic, who had stood patiently through the entire exchange, finally spoke. "Perhaps," he said gently, "we should let the parents make this choice, as it has always been meant to be." A few heads nodded in agreement, and I saw something shift in the room, a quiet realignment of sympathy that hadn't been there a few minutes before. My mother, sensing the tide turning against her, tried once more. "I just wanted him to have a strong name, a name that means something," she said, quieter now, almost pleading. "Theodore means gift of God," I answered. "I don't need you to tell me what a strong name sounds like. I chose his name the same way I chose to become his mother, with everything I have." The words surprised even me as they left my mouth, but I meant every one of them. I wasn't just defending a name anymore. I was defending the right to raise my own child without my mother rewriting the story before it had even begun. My mother stood there for a long moment, the microphone still loosely in her hand, and then, slowly, she set it down on the small table beside the podium. She didn't apologize, not fully, not in the way I might have once hoped for, but she stepped back from the front of the church and returned to her pew without another word, her earlier confidence visibly deflated. My aunt quietly gathered the monogrammed gifts back into the basket and slipped it beneath the pew, out of sight, as if the whole moment could be tucked away and forgotten. Father Dominic looked to Weston and me, waiting for our signal, and I nodded. We stepped forward together to the baptismal font, and this time nothing interrupted us. He poured the water gently over Theodore's small head, and the words rang out clear and unshaken through the church. "Theodore, I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." Theodore let out a small cry, more startled than upset, and a soft ripple of laughter and relief moved through the crowd, breaking the tension that had held the room only minutes before. Afterward, as guests came forward to offer congratulations, several of them quietly apologized for going along with my mother's announcement earlier, admitting they hadn't known what else to do in the moment. I told them there was nothing to apologize for. The only person who owed an explanation was the one who had tried to make a decision that was never hers to make. My mother left shortly after the ceremony ended, without lingering for pictures or the small reception afterward, and though part of me ached at the distance now sitting between us, a larger part of me felt something close to peace. I had protected my son's name, but more than that, I had protected the simple truth that some choices belong only to the people making them. Weston squeezed my hand as we walked out of the church into the afternoon light, Theodore finally calm and drowsy against my chest. Whatever came next with my mother, whatever conversations still needed to happen, I knew one thing for certain. I would not let anyone else write the story of my family for me. Not that day, and not ever again. If this story moved you, if you believe a mother should always have the final say over her own child's name and future, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story like this one.